The moment I knew something was very wrong was when my mother-in-law stood in the middle of my living room, clapped her hands once, and said, "This sofa must go. It makes the house look small." I froze. She said the house. Not your house. Not your place. The house. My husband laughed lightly, like she had just told a funny joke. He nodded and said, "You're right, Mama. We'll replace it." Replace it. I stood there holding a glass of water that had already gone warm in my hand. No one asked me anything. No one looked at me. They spoke like I was not even there. Like I was part of the furniture they were planning to change. That was the first clear moment when I felt it. That heavy feeling in my chest. That quiet warning inside my head telling me something has shifted. We had been married for just 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Before the wedding, my husband was gentle. He listened. He smiled at me like I was something precious. After the wedding, something else moved into our home with us. Something loud. Something demanding. Something that wore my mother-in-law's face and used my husband's voice. That morning, she had arrived without calling. I was still in my house dress, my hair wrapped loosely, when I heard loud knocking. Not polite knocking. The kind that says, "I belong here." When I opened the door, she pushed past me before I could even greet her. "So this is where you live now," she said, looking around like an inspector. I smiled weakly and said, "Good morning, Mama." She did not answer. She walked straight into the living room, touching things, lifting corners of rugs, opening curtains. My husband followed her in, carrying her handbag like a loyal assistant. "You didn't tell me you were coming," I said softly to him. He shrugged. She wanted to see the place again. Now that we are married, things are different. Different. That word followed me all day. My mother-in-law sat down like a queen, claiming her throne. She began listing changes. The curtains were too light. The dining table was too small. The kitchen shelves were arranged the wrong way. "You young women don't know how to set a proper home," she said. "But don't worry. I'll teach you." Teach me. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. "Yes, Mama." She smiled, satisfied. As she spoke, I noticed something else. My husband did not once defend me. He did not once say, "This is her choice," or "She arranged it this way." He just agreed with everything she said. At one point, she turned to him and said, "Now that you are married, this house must reflect your authority." Authority. That word landed hard. My husband straightened his shoulders. "Of course, Mama." Then he turned to me. "You'll need to start adjusting," he said. "A married woman must learn." Learn what? How to disappear? I excused myself to the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I pretended to rinse cups that were already clean. I could hear them talking in the living room, their voices low but confident. "This place has good space," my mother-in-law said. "Very good. We can do a lot with it." "Yes," my husband replied. "I was thinking the same." We. That word again. When I came back, she was already calling a carpenter on her phone. I sat quietly on the edge of a chair and watched them take ownership of my life, one sentence at a time. Later that evening, after she finally left, I expected my husband to say something kind, something soft, maybe even apologize. Instead, he locked the door, turned to me, and said, "You need to respect my mother." I looked at him carefully. "I do," I said. "But this is also my home." He frowned. "Our home." The way he said it made it sound like a correction, like I had made a mistake. "I just think," he continued, "now that we are married, you shouldn't behave like you're living alone anymore." I nodded again. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how fast things had changed. I remembered the first day he ever stepped into this apartment. He had smiled and said, "You have good taste." I remembered how proud I felt then. Now, that pride sat quietly inside me, watching, waiting. The next few days were the same. My mother-in-law came often, too often. She brought people without telling me. She told neighbors stories about my son's house. She corrected me in front of others. My husband started making small rules. What time I should wake up. What kind of food I should cook. Who should visit and who should not. Each rule came with a smile. Each smile came with control. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes, my husband walked in and said casually, "Mama thinks we should move the bedroom closer to the window." I stopped folding. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "Better airflow." I wanted to ask why his mother was deciding where we should sleep. Instead, I said nothing. Silence had become my shield. That evening, I sat alone on the balcony and thought about the choice I made long before marriage. A choice that felt small then, but heavy now. I had chosen not to talk too much about certain things. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I believed that some truths are safer when they stay quiet until the right moment. As the sun went down, I heard laughter inside the apartment. My husband and his mother were joking like teammates, like partners in a shared project. I felt like the project. I went inside, smiled, and served dinner. Inside my chest, something hardened. Not anger, not fear, awareness. That was the day I understood that marriage did not change people. It only revealed them. And that was the day I decided to keep watching. Carefully. I did not always know how to stay quiet. There was a time when I spoke freely, laughed loudly, and explained myself even when no one asked. But life has a way of teaching lessons slowly, through small moments that feel harmless at first. Chapter 2 of my story begins long before the wedding, before my husband started correcting me, and before his mother walked into my home like she owned the walls. It begins with work. I worked many years without noise. I took extra shifts. I saved little by little. I skipped things I wanted so I could afford things I needed. I learned how to budget, how to plan, how to wait. There was no man helping me then. No family pushing me forward, just me and the quiet promise I made to myself that I would never be helpless. When I finally bought the apartment, I cried alone on the floor. Not loud tears, soft ones, the kind that come from relief. The apartment was not big or fancy, but it was mine. Every wall felt safe. Every corner felt earned. I did not tell many people. I learned early that when too many people know your business, peace disappears. Then I met my husband. He was charming. He spoke with confidence. He liked to talk about plans, success, and leadership. He talked a lot about how a man should provide and protect. At the time, I thought he was responsible. I thought his words meant safety. I did not see that behind his confidence was a need to control. When he visited my apartment while we were dating, he never asked who owned it. He assumed. Everyone assumed. I noticed that assumption, and I stayed quiet. Not to deceive him, but to observe him. I wanted to see how he behaved when he thought I depended on him. Sometimes he would say things like, "Once we marry, you won't need to worry about anything." Or, "A woman should relax when she marries a strong man." I smiled and nodded. Inside, I listened. His mother came into the picture early. She was polite at first, but her eyes measured everything. She asked questions that were not really questions. She liked to remind me of her son's importance. She spoke as if marriage was a favor I was receiving. When the wedding plans started, things moved fast. Decisions were made quickly. Opinions were strong. I noticed that my voice mattered less each day. Still, I told myself it was just stress, just excitement, just culture. I chose not to speak about the apartment. After the wedding, that choice began to make sense in a way I did not expect. Living together changed the air between us. My husband began to speak differently. His words became instructions. His tone became firm. He talked about order and structure. He spoke about how his mother knew best because she had raised him. I watched. I listened. I stayed calm. My mother-in-law began visiting without warning. She opened cupboards. She commented on my cooking. She criticized my routines. Each time, my husband supported her. Each time, I felt smaller in my own space. One evening, after she left, I asked my husband gently why she needed to come so often. He looked surprised. "She's my mother. This is my house, too." That sentence stayed with me. My house, too. Not our home. Not our space. My house. That was when I understood something important. They did not see me as a partner. They saw me as someone added into their existing structure. Someone expected to adjust quietly. From that day, I became more careful. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to be understood. Instead, I watched how they spoke when they thought I was not listening. I noticed how my husband changed when his mother was around. I noticed how decisions were made without me. Amina noticed too. She came over one afternoon and pulled me aside. She asked simple questions. Who paid for what? Whose name was on documents? Who made final decisions? I answered her with half smiles and soft words. She looked at me seriously and said, "Protect yourself." That night, I checked my papers again. Everything was where it should be. Safe, quiet. My husband started asking strange questions around this time. Questions about property rules. Questions about ownership. Questions about what happens if a house is sold. He asked them like jokes, but his eyes watched my face carefully. I laughed lightly and changed the subject. Silence was no longer just a habit. It was a choice. I realized that people who feel entitled do not like questions. They like answers that serve them. The less I said, the more they revealed. My mother-in-law began planning changes openly. She talked about who could live with us. She talked about how space should be used. She spoke with confidence that did not belong to her. My husband agreed with everything. I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I was learning. By the end of that month, I understood something very clearly. If I had spoken too soon, I would have lost control of my own story. Silence was not fear. Silence was preparation. And so I waited. The first time I realized my husband and his mother were keeping things from me, it did not come with shouting or anger. It came quietly, like a shadow moving across a wall. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but day by day, the signs became clearer, and silence in the house began to feel heavy. It started with whispers. They would be talking normally, laughing even, but the moment I entered the room, their voices dropped. Sometimes they stopped completely. Other times, they changed the topic so fast it felt rehearsed. My husband would smile at me and ask something simple, like what we were having for dinner, as if nothing important had been happening before I arrived. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. Marriage was still new. Adjustments were normal. But deep inside, a quiet part of me was taking notes. One afternoon, I returned home earlier than usual. I had forgotten a file and came back to get it. As I opened the door, I heard my mother-in-law's voice from the living room. She was not whispering. She was speaking freely, confidently, the way people speak when they believe no one else is around. "This place is too valuable to be wasted," she said. My husband answered her. "I know. That's why I've been thinking." I stopped moving. They were sitting on the couch, backs turned toward the door. I stayed where I was, holding my bag tightly, my heart beating slow and loud in my chest. "We need to be smart," my mother-in-law continued. "Property like this can work for us." "For us," my husband repeated. I did not hear my name. Not once. They talked about space, about rooms, about possibilities. They spoke like planners, not like guests, like owners. When I made a small noise on purpose, they both jumped slightly. My husband turned around quickly, his face changing the moment he saw me. "Oh, you're back already?" he asked. "Yes," I said calmly. "I forgot something." His mother smiled too widely. "You should call before coming home suddenly," she said, half joking, half serious. I smiled back and walked into the bedroom. That was the day I stopped doubting myself. After that, the strange behavior increased. My husband started spending more time on his phone, stepping outside to take calls. His mother stayed longer during visits, sometimes sleeping over without asking me first. They talked more, planned more, decided more, and I listened. One evening, while I was in the kitchen washing dishes, I heard them again. The water was running, but their voices carried through the hallway. "She doesn't ask questions," my mother-in-law said. "That's good." My husband laughed softly. "She trusts me." That sentence cut deeper than any insult. Trust. They were using my trust like a tool. I turned off the tap and stood still, my hands wet, my chest tight. I wanted to walk in and confront them. I wanted to ask what exactly they were planning, but something stopped me. That same instinct that had guided me for years whispered again, "Wait." Instead, I dried my hands and returned to the kitchen table, acting normal when they joined me. I served tea. I smiled. I listened. From that day, I became even more careful. I noticed how my husband began asking questions that sounded innocent but were not. He asked about building management, about documents, about what happens if someone wants to make changes to a property. He asked like he was curious, but his eyes always watched my reaction. I gave him nothing. I answered vaguely. I changed subjects. I laughed lightly and spoke about unrelated things. Each time I stayed calm, he seemed more confident, and each time he felt confident, he revealed more. My mother-in-law started inviting relatives over. She showed them around proudly, explaining future plans for rooms that were already furnished. She spoke as if decisions had already been made. "She's quiet," she told one woman, pointing at me. "That's good. Loud women bring problems." I smiled politely while my stomach twisted. Amina came over again during this time. She noticed the tension immediately. The way my husband spoke over me. The way his mother corrected me. The way I moved carefully in my own space. That night, after my husband and his mother went out, Amina sat beside me and held my hand. "Something is wrong," she said softly. I did not argue. She asked me again about documents, about safety, about control. This time, I did not avoid the topic. I told her enough to make her understand that I was not unprotected. She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "Then keep watching." Watching became my routine. I watched how my husband made promises without consulting me. I watched how his mother spoke about money she did not earn. I watched how they grew bolder with each passing day. One evening, I overheard something that made everything clear. They were talking about borrowing money. "With a place like this," my mother-in-law said, "people will take us seriously." My husband agreed. "Once things are arranged, it will be easy." Arranged. They were planning something big, something serious, and they were doing it without me. I felt fear then, not the kind that makes you panic, the kind that sharpens your senses, the kind that makes you careful. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, listening to his breathing, I realized how little I truly knew the man next to me, or maybe how little he knew me. I understood then that they believed my silence meant permission. They were wrong. From that moment on, I stopped feeling confused. Everything became clear. Their kindness had conditions. Their respect depended on control. Their plans did not include my voice. So I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid, but because I was ready. By the time Chapter 4 of my life began, silence was no longer just something I used to protect myself. It had become my way of seeing clearly. When you stop talking, people stop hiding. They assume you agree. They assume you are weak. And because of that, they reveal who they truly are. My husband and his mother were no longer careful. They walked through the apartment like people who had already claimed victory. They discussed changes openly now. Big changes. Not small things like curtains or chairs anymore. This time, they spoke about locks, keys, and access. One morning while we were having breakfast, My husband said casually, "I was thinking we should change the door locks." I looked up slowly. "Why?" He shrugged. "Security. You know how things are these days." Before I could respond, my mother-in-law nodded strongly. "Yes, very important. Too many people know this place." Too many people. I was the only one who lived there before marriage. I nodded and said nothing. Later that same day, my mother-in-law brought a man I had never seen before. She did not introduce him. She simply told him to look around. "This is the living room," she said. "Very spacious. Good light." The man nodded and made notes on his phone. I stood there quietly, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I wanted to ask who he was. I wanted to ask why he was in my home. But I said nothing. After he left, I asked my husband calmly, "Who was that?" He waved his hand. "Just someone Mama knows. He understands houses." Understands houses. That night, I could not sleep. My body was tired, but my mind was wide awake. I lay there listening to my husband breathe, wondering when exactly he stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an obstacle. The next few days were worse. My husband began to tell me things instead of asking. He told me when his cousin would come to stay. He told me which room would be used for what. He told me I should stop inviting Amina over so often. "She asks too many questions," he said one evening. That sentence confirmed everything. I smiled and said, "Okay." Inside, something settled. A cold, steady calm. My mother-in-law started talking openly about money. She complained about how expensive life was, how families had to support each other, how children owed their parents everything. She spoke loudly, clearly, and often while looking directly at me. One afternoon, while we were alone in the kitchen, she said, "A woman must know her place in a marriage." I turned to her and smiled politely. "Yes, Mama." She leaned closer. "And a wise woman does not interfere in men's matters. Men's matters." I nodded again. That same evening, something happened that changed everything. I had gone to bed early, pretending to be tired. In truth, I could not sleep. My mind was restless. After some time, I heard voices in the living room. My husband and his mother thought I was asleep. Their voices were low, but the walls were thin. "This cannot wait any longer," my mother-in-law said. "People are asking questions." "I know," my husband replied. "I'm handling it." "She doesn't suspect anything?" My husband laughed softly. "She's too quiet." "Too quiet. She trusts you," his mother said. "Yes," he answered. "That's why this will work." My heart beat faster, but I did not move. "What about the papers?" my mother-in-law asked. "I'm working on that," my husband said. "Once everything is settled, she won't have a choice." I held my breath. No choice. They were talking about making decisions that would trap me. Decisions that would leave me with no voice. That was the moment I knew they were not just disrespectful. They were dangerous. The next day, I acted normal. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled. Inside, I was planning. I checked every document again. I read every page slowly. I confirmed dates, names, and signatures. Everything was clear. Everything was secure. I called Amina and asked her to come over. When she arrived, I did not explain everything. I did not need to. She looked around and understood. "They're going too far," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. She asked me what I planned to do. "I will wait," I said. She looked surprised. "Wait." "Yes," I said again. "They are not done yet." And I was right. 2 days later, my husband came home unusually cheerful. He hugged me longer than usual. He spoke softly, too softly. "We should talk," he said. We sat in the living room. His mother was not there, but I could feel her presence in every word he spoke. "I've been thinking about our future," he said. "About security. I listened. There's an opportunity, he continued. Something that could help us grow faster. I nodded slowly. What kind of opportunity? He hesitated. Something involving the apartment. There it was. I looked at him calmly. Go on. He smiled, relieved by my calmness. It's nothing bad. Just paperwork. Temporary. Temporary. Once it's done, he said, everything will be easier for us. For us, he repeated. I did not ask questions. I did not argue. I simply said, let me think about it. His smile faded slightly. There's not much to think about. I met his eyes. I still want to think. That night, my mother-in-law came over unannounced. She did not sit. She stood in front of me. My son told me you are hesitating, she said sharply. I kept my voice calm. I like to understand things fully. She frowned. You are a wife. You should support your husband. I do, I said. Then don't delay, she replied. I nodded again. Inside, I felt no fear, only certainty. They believed I was cornered. They believed silence meant surrender. They had no idea that the quiet woman in front of them was already 10 steps ahead. And that was the night I fully understood something important. They were building their confidence on my silence. And very soon, that silence would end. The morning everything came to the surface did not feel special when I woke up. There was no warning in the air. No sign that this would be the day their confidence would turn into panic. The sun came in through the curtains like it always did. The apartment was quiet. My husband was already awake, moving around with purpose, talking on the phone in a low voice. I watched him from the bedroom doorway. He looked confident, relaxed, certain. That confidence told me everything. Breakfast was unusually calm. My husband smiled more than usual. He asked if I slept well. He even offered to make tea. His kindness felt heavy, like clothing that did not fit properly. My mother-in-law arrived before noon. She came dressed nicely, carrying her handbag like someone attending an important meeting. She did not greet me properly. She went straight to the living room and sat down. Today is a good day, she said. I nodded. Is it? Yes, she replied. Things will finally move forward. My husband stood beside her, hands behind his back, like a man waiting for approval. He cleared his throat. We need to talk. I sat down across from them. They looked ready, prepared, confident. My husband began explaining. Slowly, carefully. He talked about opportunities, about growth, about family responsibility. He avoided details but used big words. He spoke as if the decision had already been made. My mother-in-law nodded at every sentence. When he finished, he looked at me and said, So we'll go ahead with it. I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I asked one simple question. Go ahead with what, exactly? They exchanged a look. My husband frowned slightly. The arrangement, the one I mentioned before. I tilted my head. You mentioned many things. My mother-in-law sighed loudly. Don't pretend, she said. You know what we mean. I smiled politely. I want to hear it clearly. My husband hesitated, then said, Using the apartment to secure funds. There it was. I nodded slowly. And whose name will be used? Silence. My mother-in-law leaned forward. Why does that matter? It matters to me, I said calmly. My husband's smile disappeared. Why are you suddenly asking questions? I looked at him carefully. Because you are suddenly making decisions. My mother-in-law's voice hardened. You are a wife. This is not your concern. I took a deep breath. No, I said softly. This is exactly my concern. They stared at me. My husband laughed nervously. You're overthinking. This is family business. I nodded. Yes, it is. Then I stood up. I walked to the bedroom and returned with a folder in my hands. I placed it gently on the table. They watched me, confused. What is that? My husband asked. Information, I replied. I opened the folder and slid the documents across the table, one by one. The room felt smaller with every page. My husband's face changed first. His eyebrows pulled together. His confidence cracked. My mother-in-law picked up one paper, squinted at it, then picked up another. Her mouth opened slightly. "What is this?" she asked. I sat down again. "The truth." My husband swallowed. "Why is your name there?" "Because it belongs there." My mother-in-law looked at him sharply. "What does this mean?" I answered before he could. "It means the apartment belongs to me." Silence filled the room. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses on your ears. My husband shook his head slowly. "That's not possible." "It is," I said. "And it always has been." My mother-in-law stood up abruptly. "You lied." "No," I said calmly. "You assumed." She turned to her son. "You said this was your house." He looked at the floor. I continued, my voice steady. "I never hid anything. You never asked. You decided." My husband looked at me now, his eyes filled with something new. Fear. "So all this time," he began. "All this time," I said. "You were planning with something that was never yours." My mother-in-law's voice rose. "You embarrassed us." I met her eyes. "You tried to use me." She slapped her hand on the table. "After all we've done for you." I smiled sadly. "What you did was take." My husband stood up. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at him carefully. "Because I needed to see who you really were." That hurt him more than anger ever could. The room was quiet again. My mother-in-law grabbed her bag. "We are leaving." She turned to me. "You are a wicked woman." I nodded. "If protecting myself makes me wicked, then so be it." They left without another word. That evening, my husband returned alone. He did not shout. He did not argue. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. "You planned this," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "You did." He sat down slowly. "What happens now?" I looked around the apartment. My apartment. "Now," I said, "I decide." He nodded, defeated. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Silence had done its work, and it was finally my turn to speak. The days after everything came out were quieter than I expected. There was no shouting, no dramatic scenes, no public fight. What remained was silence, but this time it was different. It was not the silence of fear or waiting. It was the silence of clarity, the kind that comes when the truth has already done its work. My husband moved through the apartment like a stranger. He spoke only when necessary. When he looked at me, his eyes no longer carried authority. They carried confusion, regret, and something else he never showed me before: uncertainty. My mother-in-law did not return. Not the next day. Not the day after that. Not at all. Her absence was loud, but it was also peaceful. For the first time since the wedding, the apartment felt like it could breathe again. The walls felt familiar. The air felt lighter. I noticed small things I had stopped seeing: how the light touched the floor in the mornings, how quiet the evenings were without constant criticism, how calm I felt sitting alone on the couch. One evening, my husband finally spoke honestly. "I didn't know you were this strong," he said. I looked at him and replied, "You never tried to know." That was the truth. He had loved the idea of me, not the reality. He loved the quiet woman he thought he could control, not the thoughtful woman who knew when to speak and when to wait. He asked if we could fix things. I did not answer right away. I thought about the whispers, the plans made without me, the way my silence was mistaken for weakness. "I don't know," I said finally. "Because trust doesn't come back just because the truth is exposed." He nodded slowly. For the first time, he did not argue. In the days that followed, I focused on myself. I returned to routines that belonged to me. I cooked when I wanted to. I invited Amina over without asking permission. I rearranged the living room back to the way I liked it. No one stopped me. Amina watched me carefully one afternoon and smiled. "You look lighter," she said. I am, I replied. She asked me if I felt guilty for keeping the truth hidden for so long. I thought about it. No, I said. I feel relieved. Silence saved me. She nodded. And wisdom kept you safe. My husband tried. In his own way. He helped more. He spoke less. He stopped involving his mother in our daily lives. But something between us had shifted permanently. Respect, once broken, does not return easily. One night, he admitted something that surprised me. My mother thought you would never speak, he said. She said quiet. Women always endure. I looked at him calmly. Quiet women observe. That conversation changed him. But change does not erase damage. It only shows intention. Weeks passed. Eventually, my husband moved out. Not in anger, not in drama. Just a quiet decision we both understood was necessary. He said he needed time to think. I said I needed space to breathe. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the middle of the living room and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Freedom. Not because I was alone, but because I was no longer shrinking. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were moments of sadness, moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if things could have been different if I had spoken sooner. But then I remembered something important. If I had spoken sooner, I would have been silenced. If I had revealed everything early, I would have been pressured. If I had trusted too quickly, I would have lost control. Timing saved me. I learned that strength does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like listening. Sometimes it looks like letting people show you exactly who they are before you respond. Months later, I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the city lights come alive. The apartment felt like home again. Not because it always was, but because I reclaimed it. I thought about how many women are told to endure, to adjust, to stay quiet for peace. I thought about how silence is often forced on women, but rarely chosen. I chose mine, and when I finally spoke, it mattered. My mother-in-law never apologized. I did not expect her to. People who believe they are entitled rarely do. My husband tried, but apologies cannot undo intentions. What mattered was this: I survived without losing myself. I did not raise my voice. I did not fight dirty. I did not beg. I waited, and waiting gave me power. Now, when I wake up each morning, I feel safe in my own space. I make decisions without fear. I speak when I want to. I stay silent when it serves me. I no longer confuse silence with weakness. Silence is a language, and I learned how to speak it fluently. That is how my story ends. Not with revenge, not with shouting, but with a woman standing firmly in her truth, in her home, and in her power. And that, to me, is the strongest ending of all. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting revenge stories.